Hello and welcome to today's show where I will be unpacking gun violence in the United States. Now, because this is a very intense topic, I do think it's important to do a little viewer discretion and trigger warning before today's episode. And that's not because, guys, I'm going to show you any, violent imagery or anything like that, but more so because in the United States, there is a very good likelihood that yourself or someone you know has been a victim of gun violence, or maybe you have witnessed gun violence before. So we're covering a very intense topic today, so I did want to put that out there. Now, how I am going to be covering this, we're going to look at data, we're going to look at violent crime research, so what actually leads to violent crime. We're going to look at a case study from Australia. We're going to discuss a little bit about the Second Amendment, and then we're going to finish, as I like to do, with some solutions via policy. But before that, let's jump into our quick hits of the week, starting with more fascism running wild in the US of A. So, Wisconsin judge was charged with felonies for alleged obstruction. So, FBI agents arrested Milwaukee judge Hannah Dugan, and she was charged in federal court for allegedly helping an undocumented immigrant avoid arrest. So, specifically what I read is she was accused of escorting the man and his lawyer out of her courtroom through the jury door after learning authorities were seeking his arrest. Eventually, this man was taken into custody outside of the courthouse. Now, this arrest led to widespread protests Saturday outside of the FBI in Wisconsin. Some of the chants that were said were immigrants are here to stay and liberty and justice for all. So those were some of the chants that the protesters were saying. And guys, this is an intimidation tactic to force the judicial branch to comply with these insane unconstitutional orders while at the same time diminishing the power of the judiciary, right? So I also want to add, just imagine for a second how Fox News and conservatives would lose their absolute mind if this shoe was on the other foot. So if Harris or Biden or Obama called for the arrest of a judge that they disagreed with, Fox News would have a conniption. So once again, this is just more fascism taking root, where they're trying to get the judiciary to comply with executive orders, even though the judiciary is a branch of checks and balances, right? It is not there to serve the executive branch, okay? Second story, this one is very, very infuriating, but ICE denied Khalil Mahmoud's return to see his son's birth. So Mahmoud Khalil, he was the Columbia University's grad student who was abducted by ICE about a month ago. He currently remains in a detention center in Louisiana, and he is married to a U.S.-born female who recently gave birth. So Khalil requested to see the birth of his child, but was denied by ICE, according to email correspondence. The mom responded to this, saying that the Trump administration has taken away what she quoted as, or what I'm quoting here, she said, a precious moment for their family, and that his son should not, or her son should not be forced to navigate the world without his father, particularly in the first few days of their life. So guys, this is a multitude of constitutional crises. First of all, you have an issue with free speech. The reason Khalil was detained was because he spoke out against the genocide in Gaza. That is the reason. So he was arrested for detained, for exercising free speech. He has no violent history. They are just trying, very similar to the first story, guys. They're trying to silent dissent and get compliance. And particularly they're trying with the free speech, they're trying to get people to not talk poorly about Israel and Netanyahu and what Israel has done with genocide. And we see this across college campuses. They are disappearing college students who are exercising free speech rights. What is frustrating to me from just an onlooker, an average American like you guys listening, is Republicans were up in arms about free speech violations. But it seems like if it doesn't happen to their people, whatever that means, their community, people who are close to them, they don't care. So for me, I think free speech is universal, regardless of if I agree or disagree with you. And detaining people for exercising free speech is unconstitutional. Now, due process, the 14th Amendment. We also have a huge constitutional crisis with that because, guys, you can't assume someone is guilty of something if you don't actually go through the due process. That's the whole purpose of it, to prove guilt or innocence. And through what we've seen with a lot of these ICE detainments, abductions, deportations of like Kilmore Abrego, things like that, we are just completely throwing due process to the wind. And guys, I want to remind you the end of this, if due process is eliminated, which I would argue it already has been for certain communities, people can be punished without any proof. That is why this is incredibly disturbing, and while everyone should be up in arms about these ICE detainments. Story number 3. White House is actually looking to replace Pete Hegseth. Now, asterisk, wait and see. But the White House apparently is looking for a new defense secretary to replace Hegseth, and this is according to a U.S. official. Hegseth, guys, should never have been given the position in the first place. He is unqualified to multiple degrees. He should have never been in this position. And he's currently in controversy for sharing military operational details in Signal group chat again. Yes, guys, this is not a repeat of the previous story. This was, again, a second time. And this time, it wasn't just some government officials and a reporter, which is bad enough. He also shared secrets with his wife, brother, and a lawyer, according to the officials. So, guys, he, along with a lot of the other members with the original Signal group chat fiasco, should have already resigned. But we have such a lack of accountability at the highest levels of the country. Whereas if me and you would do the same things at our jobs that these people do, we would be let go immediately. But somehow we have an ecosystem where people who we should be actually holding the most accountable are elected representatives, or assigned officials here in this case, assigned by Donald Trump. But I just don't get the lack of accountability that is taking course in the United States. Last thing with this story that's really important to remember. This lies at the feet of Donald Trump. Trump, guys, is the person who appointed Pete Hegseth. He was never qualified for the position to begin with. Trump also appointed people like Elon Musk, guys. So those people that are failing in their positions, that are deeply unpopular, Trump's also deeply unpopular. Guys, the fish rots from the head down. Trump is the president. This is his responsibility just as much as it is Hegseth. I need to point that out so that, time doesn't pass and everyone's like, Hegseth was the best. Trump put him in the position. Okay. And these were just predictably bad hires, but Trump basically hires people by watching television and seeing who likes him. That's his hiring process. All right. Story number 4 here. This is a positive story. RFK Jr. plans to phase out artificial dyes from food supply. So the Trump administration announced intentions to phase out synthetic dyes commonly used in many candies and cereals. So those are those colors, guys, that give, things like Skittles and Trix, different cereals and candies, those very bright, like fluorescent colors. FDA Commissioner Marty Makary said they would work with the industry to, this is what concerns me here, guys, voluntarily eliminate 6 commonly used dyes by the end of next year. So they're also starting the process, by the way, of banning 2 other colorants. But my concern is the voluntary elimination. I hope this is a mandate, because credit to where credit is due, guys. I am not loyal to Democrat or Republican. I'm loyal to good policy. You guys will hear me say that over and over again. Our food supply chain is broken. It's incredibly unhealthy. I would love to see us reform our food supply chain to have similar regulations that the European Union has, countries where the population is much healthier and lives much longer. I would love some of those changes, but we also have, unfortunately, at the same time, the administration is pulling back food safety regulations and measures. So we have this mixed bag of chaos where this on its face value is a good thing, but when you pair it with eliminating scientific research for like cancer treatments and things like that, we overall have a way net negative in our health infrastructure. But this individual story, if it can be implemented, is a good thing. I just wish we were able to find a public health official who was once again qualified, because RFK Jr. is not qualified to be the head of health in the United States. He's trying to do things like a autism like dashboard, and accessing private medical records for individuals with autism. That's insane. That is what, by the way, Germany did. They identified individuals with disabilities. That's what Nazi Germany did. So throwing that out there just so we're clear, that is insane. What it's likely going to do is it's just going to turn down the number of people who are even going to get their children screened because they're concerned about that. So you have them doing that stuff. You have the vaccine conspiracy theories where measles cases are nearing 1,000 nationwide, even though it was eradicated. So credit to where credit is due, but overall, guys, I need to be honest, not a good person to head health as a whole, but shout out to this specific story here, and hopefully it does get done. Fifth and final story. We have Pam Bondi. This is the Attorney General. She is leading a task force to combat what the Trump administration is calling anti-Christian bias. So I'm going to play the clip for you now.
Together, this task force will identify any unlawful anti-Christian policies, practices, or conduct across the government, seek input from the faith-based organizations and state governments to end anti-Christian bias, find and fix deficiencies in existing and regulatory practices that might contribute to the anti-Christian bias.
So this is a follow-up to Trump's executive order in February and I'm going to quote this, to identify unlawful policies, practices, or conduct by all executive departments and agencies and recommend any additional presidential or legislative action. Guys, we just want healthcare. We just want higher wages, good schools, good education, affordable childcare. This is utterly ridiculous. It's a giant waste of taxpayer money. Like the Trump administration, who seems to like it's the contradictions are insane. The hypocrisy is insane. They create this whole government efficiency that has been a failure. And that was one of the main things they're pushing is all of this waste. And they continue to take our taxpayer money and light it on fire and waste it nonstop. So, but the main purpose of this, so like, why are they doing this? Like, what is the actual goal? They want to attack or address abortion access. They want to lower and block abortion access. What part of this anti-Christian task force is trying to do is a lot of those protesters and some of the more aggressive actions you see outside of abortion clinics, they are trying to allow that to happen more frequently. Because remember, this party, they're the party that repealed Roe v. Wade. They do not believe women should have the choice over what to do with their bodies. So this is, an offshoot of that or a tangent of that. Also, guys, is there going to be a task force to protect Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, or is it all just about Christianity and the other religions just don't matter? This is just, guys, all this is also, in addition to the abortion thing, it's a political tactic to throw red meat at the super far right, conservative, evangelical base without actually addressing any real issues. So that's, politics 101. Do something else, distract people from their actual problems that you have no interest in addressing. So that wraps up the quick hits of the week. Now I'm going to transition over, guys, to the main unpacking part of the segment where I will be unpacking gun violence across the United States. Before we jump into unpacking gun violence in the U.S., I once again just want to put out a little warning. I will be discussing, obviously, gun violence, and it is a very widespread issue. So if that may be a triggering response to you, I did just want to put that out there. Now, we are going to jump into it, and we are going to start by talking about data. And when I was researching for this episode, and by the way, guys, I actually went to college and I partially to double major in criminology and criminal justice. So I have a little bit of a background in a lot of the research with this. But the main research I looked at was from a 2022 study from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and it was all about firearm violence in the US. And let's start with just gun ownership before we actually get to gun deaths. There is a common misconception out there that guns make us safer. The research, guys, shows the exact opposite to be true. So having access to a gun, whether it's in your household, whatever, but guns increase the risks of suicide, homicide, and accidental injury. So if you are a gun owner, it is far more likely that one of those three things happen than you, for instance, protect your family from a violent criminal. That's what the data says. Now, Americans alone own nearly 50% of the world's civilian-owned firearms. So we are not half of the world's population, nowhere close, yet we own half of the guns in terms of, not army-issued weaponry, okay? Now, this far exceeds other high-income countries in ownership. It has trended downward since COVID. I'll discuss that a little bit later. But we have far more guns than any other developed or high-income country. And then 30% of people in the US report owning a firearm. But this number, guys, drastically varies from state to state. So in a country like Mississippi or Louisiana or Texas, those numbers will likely be higher than that 30% average. But then if you go to like the Northeast, and I'm going to show you guys some of the firearm deaths and geographically in a little bit, but some have far less than 30%. Like New Jersey, I think, is in the single digits with gun ownership. Now, we have the highest gun ownership, as I've mentioned, but we also have the highest death rates of all 27 high-income countries. So our firearm homicide rate is nearly 25 times higher than other high-income countries, and our firearm suicide rate is nearly 10 times as much as every other country. Now, one of the most troubling things about this is firearms killed more children age 1 to 17 than any other cause in the United States. That includes things like car crashes and cancer. Firearms are more likely to kill our children than any of those two. Now, in 2022 alone, guys, 48,204 people, and you can see it in the image here, died from firearms alone in the US, and that averages out to one death every 11 minutes, with suicide and homicide being the main causes of the firearm deaths. Now, many more people, this data doesn't even include the people who are victims to firearm violence but survive their injuries and maybe have lifelong complications. And this doesn't even take into account the mental and psychological toll that people who are victims or people who witness gun violence have to go through. So that is a whole other, can of worms that can be examined as well. Now, geographically, guys, and I'm going to show you this with this image, Southern and Mountain West, they have far weaker gun laws, higher levels of gun ownership, and therefore have higher rates of gun deaths. And you can see it on this kind of chart here. Northeast, on the other hand, has the lowest rates generally because they part of the reason is they tend to have stricter gun prevention laws. Now, if you guys are looking for more recent data, if you're wondering, because this is from 2022, so that's still pretty recent. But if you're wondering what more recent data looks like, the CDC reported 46,728 gun-related deaths in 2023. And in terms of 2024, that data isn't really out yet, but the Trace reported, and this is only homicide. So this number is much lower because it doesn't include all gun deaths, but 16,576 is what Trace reported. And also, guys, what you're going to see in this image now is the trend is that gun violence is actually going down after reaching a peak during the pandemic. Now, the reason for that, I'm going to get into that in a second, is violent crime, guys, often spikes during times of financial strain and turmoil. And during the pandemic, our unemployment rate hit insane levels. People were hospitalized. It was a lot of chaos, and a lot of people therefore bought guns, and that led to a lot more crime. So that is why I think we're seeing a downturn, is it's not as bad as COVID was. But regardless if we're seeing this decrease, guys, it is still astronomically high, particularly when compared to other high income countries. Now, what I want to look at next, we have our data. We know we have insane gun ownership, we have insane gun deaths, and there seems to be a correlation geographically between gun laws and the amount of gun ownership and gun deaths. So what does the violent crime research say? So firstly, I'm going to repeat this. Increase to guns just leads to more violent crime. Putting a gun in the hand of a good guy, quote unquote, that's the Republican talking point. It does not make people safer, guys. Guns lead to more gun violence. That is the research. That is what the research has been time after time, study after study after study. But there are other well-researched reasons to why violent crime as a whole happens. There is some randomness to crime, guys, but generally there are patterns. And if you follow the research and create and craft policy around the research, you can work towards reducing and preventing crime. So violent crime research shows, guys, that poverty is a huge driver of crime. And it makes sense, right? If you're living in a great deal of poverty, it can often feel very helpless, right? There's a lack of opportunity, or there's a lack of access to resources. Maybe, someone living in poverty may be living in a food desert, so they can't even access, healthy food for themselves and their family, much less maybe even afford that food. If they're on, food stamps or SNAP benefits, certain foods are restricted. So income and wealth inequality, guys, are huge drivers of crime. And for a lot of people who are living in very abject poverty, crime becomes the only way for them to survive meaningfully, or it is presented as a more viable option because, once again, the opportunities are not there. So there doesn't seem to be a way out, and crime can be that pathway. Also, guys, there is a lack of social safety nets that we have in this country. So let's say you're laid off, or, you end up with a cancer diagnosis, and you don't have the best health insurance because this country is insane with the way they attach healthcare to your job. But those lack of safety nets, when people are hit with difficult situations, it leaves them into desperation. I would also add that's what leads to partially the higher gun suicide rates, is a lack of protection when people are going through some of the most difficult times in their life. Another contributing factor to violent crime. So we have poverty and a lack of opportunity. We also have untreated mental illness. Now, guys, I want to be clear. Not everyone with mental illness will become violent. In fact, a vast, vast, vast majority of people with mental illnesses do not become violent, okay? But we do have a toxic stew of a failing healthcare system that is capitalistic in nature, and many people with go around with untreated mental illnesses because they do not have health care, and it's not provided and guaranteed through the government. So that can also lead to violent crime. The last big, and there's other factors, guys, it's nuanced. There's a big pie chart, but I'm kind of taking the biggest slices of the pie chart. Thanksgiving slices, one may say. Education is another driver. Failing schools, a lack of education, guys, that also leads to limited opportunities and that feeling of helplessness that often leads to crime. And one thing I want to add to this is I covered this in my income inequality episode, but educational attainment does not drive income achievement or salary achievement like it used to. There's not that same level of upward mobility. That is why, guys, millennials, a bunch of us, I'm a millennial generation, but a bunch of millennials went to college, did their 4 years, came out, and there was no job available to them because that upward mobility isn't there like it was previously. But with that said, there is still value to becoming well-educated. People who do go to college and have college degrees, as that goes up in your level of educational attainment, you do make generally more money. It's just not as easy as it used to be, let's say. So those are some of the actual drivers of violent crime research. We have access to weaponry, we have poverty, we have untreated mental illness, and then we have education. Now, I want to transition to a case study from Australia. So this Australian case study, I actually studied this in college. It stuck with me. But it was in response to what was called the Port Arthur Massacre. So this happened in April 28th of 1996 in Australia. 35 individuals were gunned down by a shooter, and another 23 were injured. So it's one of the, darkest days in Australian history. It's actually the deadliest massacre in modern Australian history. And I want to note that was in 1996. We're in 2025, so they must have done something to prevent things like this from happening in the future. So after this happened, the Australian government did not do what the U.S. government does, which just sits on their hands every time there is a mass shooting. What the Australian government did is they made immediate changes in 1996. So in the same year, they passed the National Firearms Agreement. And I'm going to break down what this did. So there were 2 federally funded gun buyback programs and voluntary surrenders following the massacre. More than 1 million firearms were collected from the public and destroyed, and estimates have it that this is anywhere from a quarter to a third of the entire nation's stockpile just from these 2 buyback programs. Also, they instituted some additional laws. People now needed to have a firearm license to purchase a firearm. And they must, and would be something controversial in the United States, but I'm all for this due to the research. People in Australia must also demonstrate a genuine reason to own a gun. And the reason cannot be for self-defense. Okay. It can't just be, oh, I'm scared, I need one at home to protect. That is not a reason in Australia. And they also have a prohibited person list. And you cannot be part of that. All firearms, too, in Australia from this 1996 agreement needed to be registered via serial number. Sorry, guys. And they are also working on a national firearms registry. This was agreed to at the end of 2023, and they plan to have it operational within 4 years. So they had a tragic massacre. Immediately action, and not action through thoughts and prayers. That's inaction. It's not helpful. It doesn't actually solve the problem as we have gun violence, mass shooting after mass shooting. So how did this work in Australia? Well, they are faring far better far better than the US. As you can see from this image, there are around 12 gun-related deaths in the United States per 100,000 people, and there are less than 1 per the same 100,000 people in Australia. So it seems like they are doing something far better than we are. Now, I also wanted to note there were 13 mass shootings in Australia the 18 years leading up to 1996, and there were none in the 10 and a half years afterwards. I could not imagine living in the United States and there being a decade of no mass shootings. That is unfathomable to me. But Australia, they did not have one for 10 and a half years following the 1996 National Firearms Agreement. And afterwards, also after this agreement, declines in gun-related deaths accelerated. So Australia was actually on a decline before this massacre, but the legislation accelerated the decline in the gun-related deaths, including gun-related suicides. And studies have contributed or have, what is it called? I'll say contributed, the removal of weapons, or have ascribed. That's the word I was looking for. So studies have ascribed, guys, the removal of weapons as the main contributor to the lowering gun violence rates. So this is a great case study to look at because it showed there was an issue, something happened, it was addressed, and to pretty quality results. Now, with that said, guys, gun reform is not fixed immediately. Things change. There's new technology. So you need to be diligent and vigilant. Excuse, I'm struggling with my words today, guys, but diligent and vigilant about updating gun legislation as technology evolves. Now, we are going to jump into the Second Amendment because I want to jump into policy changes to go along with what Australia did, but we got to discuss the Second Amendment because this, in addition to the NRA, is a big reason, guys, why we do not get meaningful gun reform. Now, I am going to read the Second Amendment. I'm going to put it on your screen too, word for word. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay? So that is what the Second Amendment states, and a lot of Second Amendment absolutists say that this is the reason we cannot do anything to address gun violence. My response to that is utterly ridiculous that we cannot do anything because of the Second Amendment. First of all, if I wanted to take the Second Amendment word for word, we do not have a well-regulated militia. Okay? There are some far right-wing extremists who may think they are in a militia of some kind, and maybe they are, but stockpiling assault rifles at home is not being in a militia. Okay. Individuals owning firearms as a hobby or to protect their home, even though once again, data says owning a firearm makes it more dangerous, not safer. Most people are not part of a militia in 2025, and they're not protecting against government tyranny. That is absurd. That is just not what is happening. Also, guys, we already have limitations to the Second Amendment and other amendments that are on the books, because that is part of the reason why they're called amendments, is because the founding fathers acknowledged that we would probably need to change things as society evolved. And I want to ask you guys just a general question. If you're a Second Amendment absolutist and think everyone should be able to get whatever weaponry they want, do you think everyone should have access to assault weapons, including people with violent felony records, domestic violence issues, severe violent mental illness? We already have certain limitations to gun ownership for people who have, for instance, felonies. Do you want to repeal that? Should everyone have access to a nuclear arsenal if they could afford it? Like, no, guys, that is crazy. There needs to be limitations to the Second Amendment and other amendments. There's reasons you can't yell fire in a movie theater, right? There are limitations, guys. That's obvious. That's lacks intellectual honesty to not admit there have to be limitations. Now, I would also just argue, guys, the founding fathers, when they were writing this documentation, they may have they put in amendments knowing things would change, but I do not necessarily think they knew there would be assault weaponry available to the average citizen that could take out people in the span of seconds, right? That is once again why it was phrased as amendments, because there's acknowledgement that changes would need to be made, okay? So I just wanted to address that Second Amendment kind of argument. Now let's jump into what I love the most, which is the policy changes. So what do we need to do to address this pandemic of gun violence that we have in the United States? Because once again, guys, this is not a problem in other high-income developed countries. This is a uniquely United States problem. And I will start by saying this is also lies at the feet of the Republican Party. And I'm going to provide exact details for this. It has been a complete dereliction of duty from our elected representatives that they continue shooting after shooting to do anything other than thoughts and prayers, which since my last check, that has never stopped a school shooting. Thoughts and prayers, they continue to happen. If those were effective to the level that our elected representatives would like us to think, they would have stopped by now. But they do not. They continue. NRA, the National Rifle Gun Association, the NRA corruption is insane. We have elected representatives, and this is once again lies at the feet of the Republican Party. I'm going to put up a graphic now. Republican representatives take millions upon millions from the NRA year after year, and in turn, they legislate for the NRA, not for our health and safety and public safety. You guys can see the Republican candidates that are there right now. These are the individuals who are resisting any change to gun reform because the NRA is greasing their pockets. That's the reality of what is happening. That has been happening for decades. That is the main reason why gun reform has not happened in the United States. And it is a Republican issue. The Republicans are the ones preventing gun reform, not the Democrats. If you guys have been listening to this show for a while now, you know I will eviscerate the Democrats when needed. But I'm going to be honest also, always. This is a Republican issue. They are the ones blocking gun reform. So in terms of actual policy changes, big picture, we need to repeal Citizens United. That is driving all of our corruption that we have in our government, where they can get these ridiculous donations, which I just call bribes, and then they serve whoever gives them money. Okay, that is big picture. That is the first thing that needs to end, and that would address so many issues we have in our government. Now, looking more specific to gun reform, and I am talking at the federal level, because guys, if there is a law, for instance, in, let's say, I don't know, South Carolina, that's less restrictive, but there's something in North Carolina that's more restrictive, what is preventing anyone from just driving south, purchasing guns, and then going back to their home state? So I would like this to be imposed at the federal level. The first thing, guys, is an assault rifle ban. The fact this has not already happened to me is insane. There is no reason we have that level of wartime weaponry in households and in the hands of civilians. Most mass shootings, guys, are done with assault rifles. Why? They're super effective. So the argument that like, well, people will kill people anyway, sure, but at a far less rate with a handgun or knives or things like that than if you just arm civilians with, you know, AK-47s that can take out dozens of people in seconds. There is no reason to have assault rifles on the street. No reason whatsoever. There should be a federal ban. Now, another universal policy I would like to see is purchaser licensure before buying firearms. So this would, in some states have this, but once again, guys, I'm talking about the federal level. So you would submit an application. There would be background checks, safety training requirements, maybe safe storage requirements and laws. And what I would also like to see, there was a case recently, I apologize for not remembering the name, but I would like to see if young people are getting, or if anyone's getting access to someone's gun because of it not being stored properly, the original gun owner should be charged as well, particularly when it is an adolescent or youth. For instance, taking a parent's firearm and then using that to commit a crime. I think the parent should be charged almost, if not to the same level, because that crime would not have happened if you had your gun stored safely away from children. So that is another thing I would like to see, is that safe storage law. I would also like to see increased firearm removal. What we see a lot, guys, unfortunately, is domestic disputes turning into firearm homicides. Often the male in the relationship, shooting and murdering the female in a relationship, unfortunately. That's what tends to happen. So particularly in cases of domestic violence protection orders or red flag laws for extreme risk protection orders, I would like to see more aggressive legislating for our more violent individuals who have a history and removing those firearms. Second to last thing I would like to see is reformed concealed carry laws. I want to go back to what I've said before, guys. Firearms do not make things safer, and it makes things less safe. Okay. That is what the research says. You can look it up for yourself. Research after research after research. Access to guns leads to more gun violence. It doesn't make people safer. So in certain states, you can have concealed carry, which means people are carrying handguns in their pockets, in their waistbands, on the street. So what that turns into is, say you get in a violent altercation, instead of it turning into a fist fight, someone pulls out a gun and we have a death. Okay. I am not a fan of concealed carry at all. I think it should be eliminated. I think it just leads directly to more gun deaths. And then lastly, I would love to see a strong federal push for a gun buyback program. We saw with the Australian case study, guys, that it was very effective. They got almost anywhere from 20% to around 35%, I saw, of guns returned. And anytime you have less guns on the street, there will be less gun violence. Okay. What I also want to mention the Australian case study is because there was less guns on the street or available, there were also less guns stolen also. And because we live in such a capitalistic system in the United States, I think the government would be very successful if they told the public, we will give you money for turning in weapons. I think that would be very successful, and it would help achieve the goal of lowering gun deaths. So those are some of the policy changes I would like to see implemented. I think they would be very effective. I think our pushback is going to be the false narrative and just the kind of caricature pictures of like, they're taking our guns nonsense, when, guys, it's a public health emergency. If we do not do anything to address this, people are going to continue to fall victim to gun violence. That's what's happening. So that wraps up, guys, this main unpacking segment where I discussed gun violence across the United States, the data, a case study, the Second Amendment, as well as some policy solutions that I think would be very effective at combating this public health crisis that we have on our hand. Now, I'm going to finish with our shout out of the week. And this week's shout out is going to Scarlett Lewis, who I actually found out from a podcast I love, which is called This Is Actually Happening. So if you guys have not come across this podcast, I think it's incredibly enlightening and just eye-opening, because what it is, or the podcast format, they have people on who have experienced different traumatic things in life, just things that most average people don't go through, but you're able to hear from their actual perspective. So you're really able to, not have to read or listen secondhand. You are able to hear it directly from the horse's mouth, as people would say. And specifically, I want to shout out Scarlett Lewis because I listened to an episode. It was intense, but it was called What if your son was murdered at Sandy Hook. So her son was actually a victim of the Sandy Hook massacre. And during this episode, she kind of broke down, the information about her. It was really emotional, guys. I'm even getting a little, emotional thinking about it, but she was talking a little bit about her son, and then the day of, and just, kind of the fallout. And, Lewis was just really inspirational because at the end of the day, she, in anyone's reaction, if you lose a child, particularly in that manner, your response is your response, and I would never judge anyone for it. But what she did was so brave to me, not only sharing her story, but she is focused on trying to solve these problems of mass shootings and mental health illnesses. And I'm actually going to put up a picture of her website now. And a beautiful quote she has is, "Forgiving is not forgetting." And you can see that in this picture. So I encourage you guys to go, and I will put the link to her website and the episode actually below in the description. And I think one of the biggest things, and I'll leave you guys with this, that Lewis made me think, and it's kind of the way I want to live my life. It's really about the impact you are able to make on others in the time you're here. It's not about how famous you are, how much money you have, all of these other, how, in shape you are, all of those other things at the end of the day don't matter. It really comes down to, on the limited time we have here, what impact are you making on the world and others around you? And how are you making other people feel? And I think Lewis going through I don't know if there's anything harder in the world than that, but to come out of it to try to help society, I think deserves the highest level of shout out. So, thank you guys. If you made it to this part of the video, I know it's a very intense episode, but if we don't discuss the actual problems, we can never address them. So thank you for listening. That wraps up this episode of Unpacking Gun Violence Across the U.S. So until next time, guys, see ya. Thank you for watching and being part of a growing progressive community. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have the time, check out some of my other episodes you can see around me. Thank you.